I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. We've gone through some turbulent times recently in Canada, but perhaps the worst is still ahead. Robert Lyman prepared a summary of the Department of Finance report, Fiscal Reference Tables, and we posted it on our blog. But not everybody likes to read, so I'm just going to read it to you. And the title is Monumental Financial Problems Facing Canadians. Robert writes, the Department of Finance publishes fiscal reference tables that, while rarely reported on by the media, provide invaluable information about the sources and uses of public funds. Here are a few examples that offer an insight into one aspect of the costs of COVID. The federal government revenues rose from $332.2 billion in 2018 to 2019 to $334.1 billion in 2019 to 2020, then fell to $316.4 billion in 2020 to 2021. Federal expenditures, excluding interest payments on the debt, rose from $314.5 billion in 2018 to 2019 to $608.5 billion in 2020 to 2021. In other words, expenditures rose by 93% in 2 years, the largest increase in history. The federal government budgetary deficit rose from $5.6 billion in 2018 to 2019 to $312.4 billion in 2020 to 21, an increase of 5,479%. The total interest-bearing debt of the federal government rose from $1.02 trillion in 2018 to 2019 to $1.44 trillion in 2020 to 2021. A 1% increase in interest rates would add $14.4 billion to annual federal debt servicing charges. The 2020 to 2021 figures for all provinces and territories are not available yet. In 2019 to 2020, the net debt of the provinces and territories was $706.7 billion. The combined federal, provincial, territorial debt equaled 118% of the gross domestic product in 2020. By comparison, here are the debt to GDP ratios of some other countries. Greece, 177%. Italy, 135%. The USA, 107%. France, 98%. The United Kingdom, 81%. And China, 51%. These figures offer only a partial insight into the financial problems facing Canadians. Now, Robert writes, these are staggering numbers that ordinary people rarely have to consider in their daily lives, and he offers this kind of simple way to put these numbers in perspective. So if we think of 1,000, that's 1,000 seconds. Let's use seconds. That would be 17 minutes. If we think of 1 million seconds, that would be 11 days. If we think of 1 billion seconds, that would be 31.5 years. And if we think of 1 trillion, that would be 31,709 years in seconds. So there's also this interesting page tutor reference that helps people put things in perspective. The fellow who's standing by the little tiny stack of $1 million, those are packs of $100 bills in packages of $10,000 each. And then you progressively extrapolate that as the stacks go up on the pallets. Now, when we posted this on Twitter, someone came back to us and said, well, you know, even though these are the debts that the government's facing, they wrote, the net non-government sector, their savings rose by 5.6 billion in 2018 to 2019 and 312.4 billion in 2020 to 2021. Now, I asked Robert Lyman about that, and he said he couldn't confirm that, what the non-government sector savings were. But he did say that he didn't find those numbers surprising, because in those 2 fiscal years, there were enormous transfers of funds from the government to people who were adversely affected by the anti-COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions. And many people, unable to spend the way they normally do on travel, entertainment, and house improvement, saved like crazy. So, in effect, the government's debt skyrocketed, but the public's net assets in general increased. And this trend was enhanced by the incredible increase in the prices of housing, giving everyone who owns a house a huge capital gain, but removing the dream of owning a house for many young people. And he adds that, as many of you know, not everyone benefited. If you were older, a public servant, or the owner of a large house, your savings increased. But if you were a young person whose former work was in the restaurant, entertainment, or travel industry, your lifetime income was probably set back for a decade at least. So these are the financial problems that we're facing in Canada. And how is that related to climate change? Well, you know, the government has very big plans to invest in all kinds of clean tech and climate projects, but all those projects are subsidized from taxpayers' dollars. So I don't know that we can afford to address the climate emergency. And in fact, if you read the work of Roger Pielke Jr. and Justin Ritchie, you'll find that the climate emergency is over. And that may sound silly to you, but when you read their work, you find that they've discovered that almost all of the mainstream climate scientists who are publishing papers keep using this reference called RCP 8.5, which is an implausible scenario. It's not going to happen. And it's the scariest scenario out there. That's where the climate emergency comes from. But when you look at the actual figures, you find that we are not facing a climate emergency. We do have time. And it looks like from this, we don't have money. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.